Hey guys, today I want to show you how you can use acrylic paint as watercolor. So I've got my outline sketched on my paper and I'm using a round synthetic brush. So the first thing I want to do is mix up the lightest shade for my trees, for the greenery in my trees. So I'm using a wet brush first. I didn't even rinse it real well because this helps me to see where I'm putting the water. But I just want to wet everywhere that I want this yellowish color. So I've got it good and wet. And now I'm just dabbing into those wet spots and letting the yellow bleed out to the edge of the water, and it won't go any further than where your water is, so you don't have to worry about it bleeding into something else unless that something else is wet. So now I'm mixing a darker shade. I added a little bit of burnt sienna to it just to kind of dull it down. I don't like that really bright green. So now I'm doing the same thing here. I'm just putting some water down wherever I want my green. And I want to leave the edges more yellow. So I want most of my green to be closer to the house. So I'm just dabbing that into the wet spots, and you can see how it bleeds into the yellow. This acrylic paint works a lot like watercolor. There are some minor differences, but if you don't want to fool with having watercolor and you've got plenty of acrylic paint, then just use that. The paper is the main thing that matters. You want watercolor paper that is at least 140 pounds because if it's not that strong, then it will buckle and warp when you get it wet. So I'm just going darker and darker, but I'm keeping all my dark areas up near the house. So it will bleed out into the rest, but it won't get all the way to the edges where I want it the lightest. So I'm making it really, really dark up at the house. But now this is watercolor paint or acrylic paint, as this is. I know that acrylic paint normally on canvas will dry kind of dull, but a little bit darker maybe. But on watercolor paper, the paper soaks up the pigment and it lightens up when it dries. So there's a lot of layering, or maybe making it darker than you actually want it to begin with. I tend to just layer because I wait till it's dry and see what color I've got, see what I need to do to it. So that greenery over there is not finished, but I just want to let it sit there and dry. And you can dry it with heat if you want. If you dry it with heat, if you dry it with a hair dryer, you got to be careful because the force of the air will move your paint and maybe where you don't want it to be moved to. Now I use a heat gun, which still puts out air, but it's hotter air at a lower force, so that helps a lot. So I use that quite a bit. All right, so now I'm starting on my shadow, my cast shadow on the fence. So all that greenery is casting a shadow onto the fence, and so I want to lay down water first and then pick up that dull purple shade and dab it in. And again, it's only going to go where your water is. And now there's some up here, a shadow being cast onto the side of the house. Now again, when this dries, it's going to be lighter, and so I will come back and darken it later. But right now I want that subtle shade. So now I could have used my original, that first color I mixed up, and used it down here on the screenery before I mixed black in with it, but I didn't do that. But before I put that greenery in under the window, I want to put in some flowers. So I'm just using the red for that, and just dabbing in little flower shapes. This is where I need to determine like what shape my little cluster of flowers and greenery is going to be. And now I've dried that, make sure it's dry, and now I'm going in between with water so that I can put my greenery in. And you don't have to be exact with this. You'll be able to tell more about it when the green starts bleeding into it. Okay, so see how it just pulls it into the water? I love watching it do that. So it's skipping my flowers because my flowers are not wet. Okay, so now I'm using that darker green, and I want to keep the darker green more toward the bottom and the middle. Because I want it to look like the light is shining on it and casting shadow down here and leaving that top part fairly light. So I'm just dabbing into that wet green with this really dark green. Now I'm going back to my trees. The darker your darks are, the lighter your lights are going to look. So if you want it to look like this is a really bright and sunny day, then you have to make sure that your darks are dark enough. So now I'm darkening up my shadow a little bit. Now remember, with acrylic or with any kind of, whether you use watercolor paint, for this or acrylic paint. The way you lighten it is to add water to it. We're not adding white or anything like that to lighten it like you normally would with acrylic. With watercolor, you thin it down and it gets lighter. And you use less water if you want it more bold and dark. Now on the glass on the window, I don't want to paint it solid. I want to leave some white specks showing as reflection or whatever, just to make it look more like glass. Now I'm adding yellow to my purple and black. The yellow helps to dull down the purple so that you don't have that bright Crayola purple. So I'm using kind of a dirty brush just to put in some water for my shadow underneath the greenery. And now dabbing the paint into it, it'll darken it up. And I want to keep most of my darks up close to the greenery so that it kind of gets lighter as it goes out away from it. So all of this right here will be fairly dark, but it will bleed out into the rest to some degree. And some shadow on the roof line right there. Now this is the final, it may not be the final one for you, but this is as dark as I'm going to get the greenery right up by the house. And I'm just making it really dark at the house and then kind of scumbling it out into the rest. And now I want my flowers to have a little more dimension, so I'm adding some darker red to it. I'm just dabbing this in. I'm not covering the whole flower. I'm leaving some of that pink showing, but I'm putting some red kind of toward the bottoms of the flowers. Okay, now with a small liner brush, or just a small round brush, just something that you can make skinny lines with, I'm watering down some black. And this is not a line and wash, but I am putting lines in certain places, if that makes any sense. It's just to kind of define some things, but it's not the typical line and wash watercolor that I do. And this just helps to kind of make some things pop. Now with that really dark green, I'm putting in just kind of an indication of some branches and limbs and things in the tree. Okay, now it's time to decide on a matte for my painting. So I've narrowed it down to 3. So the light purple, the dark green, and the lighter green, which I don't like. So it's either the dark green, which brings out the green in the trees, or the purple, which brings out the purple in the shadows. So I think I'm gonna go with the purple. And this is how it looks framed. So I hope you guys enjoyed this and maybe learned something, and thank you so much for watching. Have a great day, and God bless you.